when I used to be a pen tester, most of our clients had web apps. Most of our engagements were web penetration tests over like a week or two. And web app pen testing is interesting, and there are some unique challenges associated with it. So to talk about that, I invited a expert penetration tester and my second favorite host of the Across the Podcast podcast, Tib3rius.
That's
Welcome.
fair. Thank you.
You do have a really good podcast though. You've had like some really good guests. It is my favorite
We've had
podcast.
you.
That, well, not in this form allegedly, but but you've had some really good guests overall and a good variety of guests. So I've enjoyed listening to that, and I'll link to that below. But yeah, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm Tib3rius, been a pen tester since 2011, 2012, sort of that time. Before that, I was sort of only, I guess technically before that, I was in cybersecurity, but like for about 6 months. And then I decided to become a pen tester. I have a chaotic career, but I sort of started off doing everything as a junior pen tester usually does. So like a bit of external, a bit of internal, some social engineering, web apps, pretty much the whole kit and caboodle. And then I'd always been interested in web app development. I had developed web apps as a teenager. And so I just sort of shifted my career towards web apps specifically. And pretty much, I would say since maybe 2014, I've exclusively tested web apps. Like there really is like web apps and APIs. So I've pretty much just been solely in AppSec and web app security since then.
Yeah, which is good because I feel like most people building products nowadays, mostly it is web apps.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I switched, is because I saw like even back in 2012, web apps were sort of slowly taking over. Like my first job, like I worked in an office and it wasn't cybersecurity related at all, but we all had thick client applications, so people, I think pre-2010, if you worked in an office, like there were always custom thick client applications that you would start on Windows, and that's where you would do a lot of your work. And I saw back then, slowly but surely, a lot of people just switching over to web apps because they were easier to maintain, easier to write. Everybody knew how to use a web browser. So you weren't necessarily teaching people a new interface because everyone kind of intuitively knew how to use it because they were used to browsing the web. So that's why I ultimately decided, hey, I think web apps are going to be pretty big in terms of cybersecurity, just because of the amount of corporations switching over to them.
Yeah.
And turns out I was right. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. And how did you, like, did you always want to be a pen tester? Like, how did that trajectory?
So I knew I wanted to do stuff with computers, and I originally went to university and did a degree in computer science, just straight computer science. And then at the end of the first year, they were like, well, you can also sort of minor in something. And they gave us options. Like one was artificial intelligence, not LLMs, but actual machine learning. I think one of them was management, and another one was cybersecurity. And cybersecurity in the UK in 2008, this would have been, I think. There was only like one university doing cybersecurity degrees, and it was the one I was at. So I thought that looked fun. Some of my friends were doing it, so we all sort of joined as a little group. And yeah, then I learned about pen testing from there, and was like, oh yeah, I definitely want to do this as a career. And then did a master's after I graduated in just solely cybersecurity. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I had this. I mean, back then it wasn't it wasn't popular knowledge that you could have a career in pen testing. Like I didn't even know pen testing was a career path until I used to occasionally visit the Cursed Orange site. Its official name is Hacker News. And Thomas Ptaszek used to shitpost a lot there, leave a lot of comments. And I used to be like, wow, this guy's kind of funny. And I checked his profile and he was like, oh, I have a pen testing company called Matasano back in the day. It no longer exists, but that's how I discovered that, there are pen testing companies out there you could work for. I feel like back then wasn't that popular.
Yeah, barely any of them still exist, I feel.
A lot of them have a short shelf life, I guess. They start at I feel like they start as like small passion projects with a small group of people who are like super passionate about pen testing, and they grow, and then they hire a lot. They inevitably turn into like a check the box type of consultancy, and then the passion dies. They sell out to a large company, they get absorbed, and then they die.
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool. So when you're doing pen testing, I want to start chronologically of like, let's say I'm a company and I want to buy a pen test and you're selling it. And one thing that is not talked about enough is the art of scoping. So I feel like scoping is something that people kind of take for granted. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that first. So let's say a company approaches you and they're like, "Hey, Tiberius, we want to buy a pen test." What do you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, so we mentioned my podcast already. We have 2 episodes on scoping. The first episode ever was Why Can't Customers Scope, which is a tongue-in-cheek kind of rage bait. And then we had a follow-up, which is Why Can't Pen Testers Scope? Because yeah, it is literally an art. Like, it's chaos. You can, as a company, take any application that you developed internally to 10 different pen test companies, and you'll get 10 different quotes. Like, there'll be a mean, obviously, but like they will wildly vary in size. So every company has a different way of doing it, and I'm not entirely sure why. It feels like it should be something we've standardized at this point, right? But what it usually comes down to, and this is probably why it's more of an art form, is how complex is the application? And that's already pretty subjective, but you can sort of measure it. And the general way it's measured, at least in my opinion, the general way it should be measured, is the number of different pieces of functionality and the number of different roles you have. Like, there's obviously nuance, but it's kind of like how we say risk is severity times likelihood, even though it's kind of more complicated than that. Complexity in a web app often can come down to amount of functionality multiplied by number of roles. And that'll get you a nice baseline that you can then tweak something from. And for years, we didn't use functionality. We would use, and to be honest, a lot of companies still do this, and I hate it. There'll be like a form that a customer will fill out, and they'll be like, how many pages are in your web application? Which was fine 15 years ago. Pages mean something completely different now. Like 15 years ago, you could ask that question and you get a straight answer because the developers would know how many pages were in the application. And nowadays, you can get a customer who probably knows exactly what we mean by that, but will still put it's a single page application. And you'll be like, yeah, technically you are correct. But a single page application, yes, technically there's one page, but there could be more functionality in that single page application than a 100-page traditional application. So this is why I hate the term page now, and we should just stop using it, and why I suggest functionality, and then define what functionality is. For me, honestly, you can define it almost like an API, right? Because a lot of applications these days just use an API. And so you can define it and say, okay, how many different API operations are there? How many different sort of paths can you access of this application to get data out of? How many different post requests are there? Stuff like that. It gets incredibly complicated, incredibly fast. And still there are customers who won't know that information or won't be able to get it easily. The role thing is honestly the more simple one to explain. It's like, okay, so do you have admin users? Do you have managers? Do you have just regular bog standard user roles? Do you have any unauthenticated functionality, right? So that I feel like is the easier one because I think everyone kind of understands what a role is. The functionality question is always the tricky one. But then a lot of scope will come down to like, how are we accessing the application? A lot of people will just assume that, internet accessible. Well, a lot of applications aren't accessible over the internet. So some parts of the scope will just come down to, well, how complicated is it going to be to actually access this application as a pen tester? Do we need to VPN in? Do we need a jump box? Because if we have a jump box in the customer environment, can we install our own tools? If we can't install our own tools, that's going to be a really bad pen test. So access comes down to a lot of things. Time, like some companies will not allow you to test during business hours, right? are we testing production? Are we testing staging? So the actual type of environment we're testing as well. So I've been on some scoping calls which will last like over an hour, because generally we'll ask for a demo of the application as well. It's always useful because we want the tester who's going to be doing this test to actually have a good idea of what the application looks like, which is another thing entirely as well, because you got to remember a pen tester, like as a company, will know how to use their application. The developers will know how to use their application. The customers' customers will know how to use the application because that's what they're paying for. But if you're giving a pen tester a week to test the application and they've never seen it before, they've never used it before, like we have to learn how to use the application first, and then we have to figure out how to break it. So that can be a whole different thing as well. If the application's like super complicated to use, like it's always going to take longer anyway. I know that's kind of a rambling answer, but
No, that's perfect. And I have many follow-ups. The first is like just usually on the first day of any pen test, I would say like just take your time clicking around. Like just click every single button to like find every single endpoint and functionality. One thing that comes up in scoping is we used to ask if they would provide source code. So black box pen test means no source code provided. White box, they give you source code. In your opinion, does that change the level of estimate? And do you have a preference on black box versus white box?
I mean, I think I'd always have to say I would prefer to have the source code. But I've said this many times on a few podcasts before, like I can count the number of times that I've been given source code on one hand. And it's not like we aren't asking for it. We always, I think, ask if we can have access to the source code. It's just that a lot of companies do not want to give it out for good reasons as well. You know, if you let go of your source code, even though we all know that security through obscurity is not security, even just giving it out, like there's a risk that, you know, or if we store it badly, it can get leaked somewhere, and then, you know, there's a lot of trust issues for obvious reasons, I think. And so yeah, a lot of companies just don't give out source code and won't want to. It's an interesting question though, because obviously with the source code, you can run various tools on it offline and find some of the more obvious stuff. And there might be things in the source code that you would just not be able to find via sort of let's just say natural pen testing, just exploring the application. Hidden endpoints, right? Like there are ways of finding hidden endpoints without the source code, but there's never any guarantees because ultimately it's going to come down to guessing stuff. So yes, it's usually you're probably going to have a better pen test. At the same time, I can definitely see some people just getting so involved in the reading and understanding of the source code that they sort of skip over large portions of the application. So it's probably a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
In that respect.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's nice to have, but I think the main issue is usually web pen tests are so tightly scoped and you have like very limited time that like you barely have enough time to test the app itself. So having to look at the source code is like this entire mini project within your project that takes so much time, and the return on investment is like not always as good as just like straight up testing the app itself. One thing I used to find more useful than the source code itself, but rarely anyone gave us access to, is the logs, the web app server logs. So I always appreciate when you did have that, because then as you're testing, you can see on the server side the logs of like how the server is responding, or is that request actually going through? How is it being processed? That sometimes was pretty useful, but almost no one would actually provide that as well. In your experience, like have you seen that? Is that common?
I don't think I've ever come across server logs being at least being provided to us. Yeah, it would be nice to have a lot of I'd say not more often than not, but a surprising amount of pen tests are against production applications. So providing those logs is like another thing entirely. It's like nope, you can't have those. So yeah, it would be good. Honestly, and this is something I recommend to all customers, is like the more information that you can give the pen tester, the better test you're going to get anyway. So many customers, and it's often also developers, unfortunately, see us as the adversary. They don't want to give us any information. And it's sad because like we are, like you guys are paying us, right? Like we're on the same team. Like, yes, I'm trying to hack your application. I'm also going to tell you how to fix it. But the problem is, like, if you see me as an adversary, well, firstly, I'm not. But also the real adversaries have so much more time. And so you might be thinking, oh, it's going to be a more realistic pen test because I have the exact same information that an attacker would have. The problem is I only have a week or maybe 2 to do this pen test. An attacker is going to have months, and they might be able to find out the information in those months doing other reconnaissance. And you didn't give it to me, so I didn't find something because I didn't, think that full thing would be there. I didn't know that sort of back end was, in the environment. So yeah, I think giving as much information to a pen tester as you possibly can within reason. I understand not giving source code. I understand not giving logs. At least tell us how the application is built, how the backend looks like. A network diagram would be great, right? Yeah, I think the more information we have, the better we can do because we do have a limited amount of time.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned that every company basically does their own scoping, assess, levels of effort in their own ways. What if we created like an open scoping standard, open web app scoping standard? Do you think like that would actually catch on? Would people like use it?
I honestly think it probably would catch on. I mean, we've seen like the OWASP top 10 catch on. I think you'd probably get to the point where it's like, that famous XKCD thing about USB standards or something like, oh, we've got another standard. That could probably, end up like there'll be people who disagree fundamentally with it because they've been doing scoping a certain way for years. Like, why are we changing it? And so they'd probably fork it and adjust it, and then we'd have the same problem. Yeah, I think standardization is good. My worry is always that, I've talked about this before. We've got to the point in the industry where like 10, 15 years ago, we decided that a web app test was basically 5 days. And here we are 15 years later, and that number is the same. Web applications have just got more complex. So it doesn't make any sense. So the problem is, if any pen testing consultancy decides to be honest and tell a customer, this needs 10 days, this is how much a 10-day pen test costs. The problem is customers aren't just going to one pen test consultancy for a scope. They're going to maybe 4 or 5. And they're going to go with the one that's going to give them the cheapest quote usually. And that'll be for a 5-day pen test. It'll basically be, well, the pen test company says they can do it in 5 days. You're saying you're going to take 10 and charge me double. It's like, yeah, but we're being honest. So it's tricky because it's sort of a weird situation where if you try and do the right thing, you're just not going to make any money because you're going to be consistently undercut by other pen test companies who are just stuck with the whole, hey, we can do it in 5 days, even though everyone kind of knows at this point you can't.
Yeah. And how would you approach that? Because like my experience with scoping is guaranteed, almost guaranteed, like 99% of the time, they'll show you the app, you'll assess the level of effort, you'll say like, okay, this takes, let's say 3 weeks, and they're going to say, absolutely not, we can only pay for a week. And so then how, like what caveat would you negotiate with them? Like how do you handle that?
It's like, it's time boxed. That's all. We say we're going to do it. We can do it in 5 days. It's going to be time boxed. And what does that mean? It's kind of weird because we use the term comprehensive pen test all the time, even though no pen test is comprehensive, like ever. Like I don't think you can even say that about internals or externals. I think it's almost like time boxed is kind of meaningless because every pen test is time boxed. When we say time boxed, usually like specifically calling it out, we're basically saying, hey, we don't think 5 days is enough. We will test it for 5 days and we'll report everything we find. It's not going to be, we can't guarantee that we're going to test absolutely everything. And we say that to be honest, but we also say that because it protects us, right? If they, they actually get hacked, and obviously it's a terrible feeling when a customer comes back and say, you pen tested our web app and you said we had these issues, and then 3 or 4 months later, somebody else finds another issue. Like, it sucks. It absolutely 100% sucks because you feel like you've done a bad job. At the same time, it's like, well, we told you we needed more time.
Yeah.
We couldn't possibly test everything.
Because they will ask you, why didn't you find that?
Yeah, they will.
And
yeah.
Yeah.
And I get it. This has happened to me in the past. I've missed something on a pen test and it sucks. But I also know that I can't beat myself up too much because I was only given a limited amount of time anyway.
Yeah.
One thing I definitely recommend, especially if you're a company that's getting a pen test every year, or hopefully multiple times a year. But let's say you test your app once every year. give the even if you switch pen test companies, give the previous reports to whoever's testing it.
Nice.
And also tell them, if you have change logs, give them the change logs. Tell them, okay, well, this section of the application is the only thing we've actually changed. All right. Because even though it's not a guarantee, if you haven't touched the code in like section A of an application for 5 years and it's been tested each of those 5 years, there's never a guarantee there's no bugs in that section, right? That's not what we're saying. But if most of your changes for the past year have been in section B instead, tell the pen test company, hey, maybe just test section B. Like, we're pretty confident section A is fine. And so you can do that as well. Like, there's no pen test company is going to turn down that kind of scope if you just come and say, hey, we just want you to test this section of the application. Honestly, that's going to give you a more realistic, more in-depth pen test than just a complete, hey, let's just test the entire application again for realistically no good reason if it's been tested multiple times.
Yeah. And I think the good clients will actually tell you like, hey, these features are new and we're particularly concerned about like this feature, for example. And so they'll give you some guidance on what to prioritize. Cool. So at this point, you scoped the app and they scheduled it and you're about to start. It's a Monday. The first hurdle is, how often do you start on a Monday and they haven't given you access?
More times than not.
And then maybe it's Tuesday and Wednesday and then they give you access?
Yeah, so I mean, pen test companies, I feel like have attempted to solve this problem by, we sort of say, hey, a week before the pen test, we need access. And invariably, that usually means 2 weeks before the pen test starts, we're emailing the customer saying, hey, we need access by next Monday, even though the pen test starts in 2 weeks. So obviously, the earlier we can get access, the better. And it really depends on the customer. Some customers are really good about it. Some customers will literally give you access like the day of the scope. They'll be like, oh yeah, we can just create accounts like now.
Nice.
Others, like, yeah, it just comes down to the wire and you'll wake up first thing on Monday morning, sit down at the computer, be like, okay, do I have credentials? No. And so, I mean, you can start, assuming you don't have to have access like through a VPN that hasn't been provisioned for you. But like if it's on the internet accessible, you can start scanning stuff. You can start testing the unauthenticated portions of the application. Absolutely, yeah. But like you're not going to get that far because honestly, most applications, the unauthenticated sort of surface area is tiny. Everything's hidden behind authentication, and that's where you want to get to. So yeah, unfortunately, it's a problem that just comes up way too much, especially considering how much we're charging. Like, pen tests are not cheap, and it's kind of silly if you're a customer, you're paying all this money to get your app pen tested, and the day of the pen test you haven't given the pen tester access, because we're not gonna not charge you. Like, the pen test is just going to be sat there scanning a few things, unauthenticated, technically testing. So yeah, it's really just, you need to get your money's worth and you need to be prepared. It doesn't usually take that long to create a couple of accounts for pen testers or set up access. I know it's a pain, but realistically, it's all about the money.
Yeah. So there's your Monday, you get access, maybe there's a small kickoff meeting, and then you have to start testing. So what's your approach? Like, what's the first thing you start doing?
I just SQL up everywhere. Yeah. No. I saw that LLM pen tester the other day. It was like, it runs like Nmap and SQL map and like Dirbuster or something. It just like spams everything. Yeah. So, I mean, you alluded to it like a few minutes ago. Like, if you're testing a web app, the first thing you do, even if you were there for the demo, even if you've watched the video of the demo, you're going to be exploring the application. I would usually, assuming that there's like an admin role, what I'll usually do is log in as the admin first, because you can generally assume that the admin account's going to have access to everything. Not always the case, by the way. Permission systems are just crazy sometimes. There are like admins who don't have access to certain parts of the app, which just seems weird. But yeah, I would generally log in with the highest privilege account I have, explore the application, just, click through, try functionality out. I'll be making mental notes and occasionally like actual notes about stuff that looks kind of interesting, right? There's a file upload maybe. If I see like a search form that just I don't know. Some search forms just look odd, but I'll be sort of making mental notes, making notes of, oh, I should probably check this stuff out, try this kind of attack. And this will all be proxied via Burp Suite, which for those who are unaware is like honestly still the main tool. I know it has competitors now, but Burp Suite Pro is the main tool that I would wager 90 to 95% of web app pen testers use. It does pretty much everything that you need it to do for a web app, but we're proxying the web app traffic through it. And so we can see the actual raw HTTP requests, and we can sort of see how parameters are being passed and, what the authentication is using, right? So if it's using JWTs, if it's using cookies. And yeah, I'll export that as the admin user. Then I'll log in probably with the minimally privileged account to see how this differs. Like, do they have access to anything? Is it just read-only access? Basically just do a comparison. And that'll usually on a 5-day pen test, that's going to be at least half of the day, if not more, just exploring the application and building that sitemap. And Burp has a really nice passive scanner, which is going to be flagging certain things for you, which is really nice. So you can always look at that afterwards. But yeah, exploring the application and getting a feel for it is good. And then it's sort of going back to your mental notes about what you saw, the actual notes you've been taking, and just trying stuff. So, if you have a form that takes some kind of search parameter, you're probably going to try SQL injection. Be silly not to, right? A lot of people think SQL injection is a solved thing, which it is. Unfortunately, it being solved theoretically doesn't mean it's solved in practice. I still find SQL injection. It's always fun. But yeah, it's just one of those issues. But yeah, the problem is a lot of what you test for after the initial recon phase is really going to be highly dependent on what you're seeing, right? If you don't see any GraphQL, you're probably not going to test for GraphQL. Right? There might be a hidden GraphQL endpoint somewhere. If I don't see it, I'm not going to test for it. I might go searching with a directory buster for it at some point, but yeah, it's really looking at the application, seeing, hey, what can I actually do? What do I think is possible? It's really a huge guessing game that's sort of powered by sort of intuitiveness, I guess, of the pen tester, which you just gain over time. Like some applications scream vulnerabilities once you've looked at enough of them. Others are just a bit more silent about that kind of thing. But yeah, it really is there's no. This is the problem with coming up with a methodology for pen testing and I've tried following the OWASP one, and it just breaks down very quickly. It's a good sort of general purpose guide, I think, but nobody ever follows it the way, I guess, it's written. It's sort of you're jumping around a lot.
Yeah, I agree. It is based on intuition. And that's what makes it challenging when people ask, well, what do you test for? Or how do you know what to look for? And it's well, you don't, but then you can't really make a checklist because that's not, you feel like you lose you lose the flow. Following a checklist feels very different than testing because you're not really looking at the app anymore. Now you're just following steps that are kind of disconnected from what you're actually seeing. And you kind of have to just use the app, click every single button and mess with it. And that you can't really make a checklist for that.
I've tested companies that use a checklist.
Really?
And I've made my own sort of checklisting application.
Really?
But the way I handle checklists is as a sort of just as a reminder and just as a self check. It's not something that I'm going through and checking every single item one by one. I have it dynamics, vibe coded, a dynamic checklist, which I can answer questions okay, how many roles does this have? And if the answer's more than one, it's going to be well, hey, reminder, make sure you check for authorization issues, right? Stuff like that.
Nice.
And it's never I have to do everything in order. It's always just hey, last couple of days of a pen test, just looking through is did I find any of that? No. Did I check for that? Yes. Okay, good. Did I check for this? Oh, maybe not. Go back and look through the Burp issues tab and look through the Burp logs and just make sure that there's nothing that screams, hey, this is something you should probably test for. So I think checklists can be helpful, especially if you're new to web app pen testing. I think checklists are probably more helpful than not. But yeah, the question I fear most in interviews is what's your methodology? It's I don't know. I don't think I have one. it's so highly dependent. It's not really a methodology. It's just, explore application. It's kind of like cavemanish, right? It's explore application, look at application, test stuff. Like
Bonk application,
yeah,
like just
exactly, right?
yeah.
So it's a terrible question because like I feel like any junior pen test is going to have a good answer to it. Once you're like senior and above, it's probably just going to be like, I mean, no, I don't have one. I'm just going to test the application the way I've been testing applications. So, yeah.
Definitely. And in your experience, like what's typically one of the first findings you find?
Oh, I mean, it depends on what we're going to class as findings, right? Like misconfigured headers are obviously technically a finding, but
Skip.
I mean, yeah. Like content security policies, I don't think there's ever a good example of a decent content security policy on any application ever, just because they're so easy
I
to
hate
mess
it
up.
anyway. I hate to configure it either way. So
Yeah.
I mean that's a separate rant. But I guess like the first, typically the first high
big one.
severity. Yeah.
Yeah, the first high stuff is, I mean, and this obviously depends on what order you test things.
Yeah.
Authorization issues are just so common still. Yeah. And I think it's probably because like a lot of the major issues have kind of been solved by frameworks. You can kind of assume if you're a developer and you're using a framework correctly, then it's almost impossible to be vulnerable to SQL injection these days if you're using a framework correctly. The issue is obviously a lot of people don't, or they use it correctly 95% of the time, and then they realize they can't do the thing that they need to do. So, we need to do a manual raw query. Oh no, now we've got SQL injection.
Yeah.
Thankfully, like cross-site scripting, a lot of that has been solved by using templates properly. Even template issues, if you use templates properly, you can't have server-side template injection. So it's a lot of that kind of stuff. The one thing I think frameworks still don't do as well as they could, and it's not necessarily a result of not necessarily the responsibility of the framework, is just authorization issues, because it's such a manual thing. Because you have to define the roles and then you have to decide as the designer of the web application which roles have access to what. And ultimately, that's going to come down to a very manual process of deciding and then implementing the checks. Usually, adding like authorization checks for a role to an application with a decent framework is actually very easy. The problem is that it's very easy to just forget one. It's very easy to say, and especially if you're adding a new role, if you add a new role and suddenly you have to now implement all those authorization checks for that role in specific areas of the application, very easy to miss one. And I think that's why we still find so many authorization issues. It's not that frameworks aren't good at implementing authorization. They are. They're very good at it. The problem is it's still very manual, and changing the permissions system is a complete nightmare a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Authorization, I should probably explain. Generally speaking, an authorization issue is when you have one user being able to access something that they shouldn't be able to access. That might be functionality that is of a different or higher role than they are. It might be a resource that's owned by another user that they shouldn't be able to have access to. But both of those access control issues, I mean, it's I think it's still number one in the OWASP top 10. In 2026. So yeah, it's there for a reason.
Yeah. And I guess
one of the only ones I agree with, but
I mean, we'll talk about that, but I guess an example would be like you log in as admin and you go to the, let's say like org settings or something, and you check a box and that like sends like a post request from the admin to like change that setting. Then you take that same endpoint and you log in as a normal user, you replay it, and boom, it works. And like, why did the normal user, why were they able to change that like admin level, take an admin level action? Do you have issues with the OWASP top 10?
I recorded a podcast episode a couple of weeks ago. It's a whole rant about it. So that'll be published in a few months. But
okay.
Yes, I've had issues with the OWASP top 10 for years, and I have videos on my YouTube channel going over why I don't like it. We can go over it a bit if you want. It kind of just boils down to I don't really see a point to it anymore. And I just think it's the way it's compiled is kind of iffy, and I don't like the name because top 10 implies that there's more than 10, which there are. The problem is they've compartmentalized and categorized so many things. Realistically, the top 10 covers like 60% of web application vulnerabilities just because it's all categories now, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Like injection is it's a single category on the OWASP top 10. There are so many different kinds of injection vulnerabilities. And like LDAP injection, extremely rare, right? Rarer than SQL injection in my experience. Cross-site scripting is technically a type of injection.
Mm-hmm.
JavaScript injection or HTML injection, whichever one you want to go with.
Absolutely.
That's in the injection category now. They moved it in. It used to be separate. That's more common than SQL injection, but it's all bunched together in the same category, and then it's sort of ranked on a sort of average scale, which I think is just, I get why they did it. I just think it's kind of a silly project now, and I don't really know who it's for.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there are better OWASP projects that for developers specifically as well to code securely and avoid these issues. I think the OWASP top 10 is more of a marketing thing now for OWASP than anything else.
Yeah. No, I mean, OWASP as an org, they have like a lot of really, really good projects. Yeah, but I guess the OWASP top 10, like web application top 10, now they have like AI top 10, mobile top 10. They have a few others. I guess they get more attention than they deserve. My main issue with them is the pentest companies that sell you a pentest saying like, oh, this is an OWASP top 10 pentest. It's like, I don't, like, what does that mean? Are you like, is that meant to like make you do less work, or are you going to look for less things now? Or are you like, I don't know what that means.
Exactly. It used to be bad. Like that used to be a bad thing when they said that. And now it's kind of like, okay, I mean, like, that covers most of the vulnerabilities, right. I guess.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
What really sucks, and I used to work for companies that did this, was when they made you, when you were writing the report, classify each vulnerability in the OWASP top 10. And it's like, okay, but it's not.
Why?
It's not in there. Like, this is technically a vulnerability. I've managed to find one. It's amazing, I know. I've managed to find a vulnerability that's not technically in the OWASP top 10. And then you sort of end up just butchering it by jamming it into one of the categories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I don't think it's relevant anymore. And I wish it would just go away and then we can never talk about it. But here we are.
Yeah, people just love lists. So...
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone wants a list.
Yeah.
Cool. So you're going through the pen test at this point. You know, you've found a few things. You have your list of notes. You have some things in your Burp history. At what point do you start writing the report? And just to reiterate, like a pen test is really, what you're really selling is a PDF. Right, like your deliverable at the end of a pen test is really that PDF. What they're paying for is that PDF and the letter of attestation that says like you got pen tested, and so people care a lot about that PDF.
Yeah. So there are a few schools of thought on this, and I used to work for companies where we would do all the testing and we'd make notes, and then we get like a day or two at the end of the pen test to write the report. That kind of works. I think it really depends on the type of test you are, to be honest. I think there are decent. I should probably preface this, like disclaimer, like there are realistically no bad ways of writing reports, like in terms of how you do it or how you structure your time, because I think there are people who can do it good any of the ways, right? So a lot of people will take notes and they'll write it all, you know, on the final days of the test. Increasingly, like my most recent companies, we were encouraged to write tests, the report as we went.
Nice, yeah. I like
which
that.
I've grown to prefer.
Yeah, same.
I think it's nice because it keeps it like it's fresh in your memory. So, and that might not even be like as you find the vulnerability. That might just be, hey, last hour or last half hour of your day is just, hey, document the stuff that you found today, which I think is decent, especially because there are a lot of times where, especially with applications that are not in production, that are being updated, like you might be in a developer environment. There's no guarantee that when you find a vulnerability on day 1, that it's still there on day 5.
That's true.
And you might be like, oh, I missed, you know, I'm writing up this vulnerability and I missed like a screenshot, or I missed a request, or I didn't see it, whatever. And you go back and you're like, I can't get it anymore. And it's like, well, I guess now it's kind of like, do I keep it in the report? We technically found it, but it looks like it's fixed. But maybe it's not fixed. Maybe some part is not working. Like, I'd argue just keep it in.
Yeah.
Pentests should be written in the past tense anyway. Pentest reports. But yeah, I think doing it as you go is better generally, at least in my opinion. That's to say, I think people can do it either way and write good reports. I've seen good pen testers do it both ways and come up with really good reports. So I think it just comes down to personal preference.
And do you have like templates of like the write-ups for some of the common findings that you would just like copy paste some parts of that?
Yeah, usually. I think that's probably a good idea for any pen test company because you want consistency. One of the major issues I think is going to be if you have lots of pen testers and you have pen tester A write a report 1 year and then they don't fix some stuff and pen tester B comes along, finds it, but then writes it up completely differently. The customer might come back and be like, okay, but why are the recommendations slightly different? Like, we want to fix this year, but we don't know which recommendations to follow. They're slightly different. So I think for consistency's sake, if you are a pen test company, you should have, at least for the major common findings, you should come to an agreement. And you can do this with your pen testers. You can, get people, hey, if you found SQL injection recently, can you submit your finding and we'll look at all the findings and merge them into a decent sort of default template. And then, obviously you can't just have a template and just put it in the report and be like, okay, that's done. Customization, so impact is always going to be different for a customer. And showing the evidence, obviously you need to show that you actually exploited something. So that'll be fine-tuned. But stuff like a description about, hey, what is SQL injection? That stuff you don't need to write from scratch every time. Recommendations, generally speaking, like there are some instances maybe where they'll change, but generally speaking, recommendations should remain the same. And the stuff that's really changing is anything to do with impact, CVSS if you use CVSS, and the evidence as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the recommendations, we had templates, and then below the template, you could sometimes add like how they could apply it in their specific environment. So I wanted to talk a little bit about AI, both from the pen testing side and from the report writing side, maybe. But so now, we have a lot of new tools. You have a video on AI, like the Burp AI feature. So in general, what has been your perspective of like using AI tools in pen testing?
Yeah, so it's the unfortunate reality that I haven't been able to. I was very fortunate that Portswigger gave me access to Burp AI to test out in my own time against, applications on the internet. I test dummy applications, stuff that I'd vibe coded to be slightly insecure. And I like it. I like where they're going. I think AI has a future in pen testing. The issue is, since the advent of AI, the companies I've worked for, and I think this is probably true of most pen test companies. And I say this because the other day I had to install Burp again. And when I went to disable Burp AI, which I have to do, it sort of says, can you please tell us why you're, can you give us a little feedback why you're disabling it? I'm like, yeah, can't use it, sorry. And the issue is the data security. Because ultimately what we're talking about when we're doing web app pen testing, and I didn't mention this at the start, but like if you want to do web app pen testing, that's great. I really think it's an exciting career. If you're the kind of person who thinks hacking is popping shells, web app pen testing probably not for you. The amount of shells you get is near zero. Occasionally we'll get one, but it's very rare. So network pen testing, that's probably where you want to be. But it's all about data security. The web app is, you can think of it as an interface to sensitive data. Realistically, that's what all web apps are. They're an interface via the web browser, giving access to data, to certain functionality that you can use on certain data. And that data itself has to be protected. That is why in Europe, at least, it's called information security, not cybersecurity. That's probably where, and I'll admit this now, don't put this in. No, you can put this in, but information security is probably a better term.
I agree. Completely agree. Yeah.
But I still love the way cybersecurity sounds, so I still will say cybersecurity. But it is about the security of information. And web apps more so, I think, than maybe internal networks in terms of like the direct connection between the sort of thing you're testing and the data. So the issue then is, okay, we're doing the pen test because we want to protect the data and we want to see if there's any way of accessing the data as a malicious actor. If you start introducing AI into that, unless you're completely using a local LLM, which you're probably not, like you're going to be using OpenAI, Anthropic, something, right? So now we're sending potentially all that data to a third-party AI company who, let's face it, don't have the best record when it comes to trust. And there are certain things where, the government in the US has said that OpenAI have to keep records of every single conversation that users have, right? Even like I know that in some cases they're saying we don't keep records of anything going to the API. And it's like, well, they probably are. In fact, in a lot of cases they have to. So the issue is now and the AI can't decide what's sensitive data and what's not unless it analyzes the data, right? So it's not like we can just make that decision on the box. So the issue is data privacy, data security. I think we're going to get to a point like we used to do this with cloud. When the cloud first became a big thing, everyone was fearful about putting data in the cloud because, everyone prior to that had their own data center racks and on their own hardware, and that's where all the data was stored. At least it was on stuff we owned. And then it's like the cloud comes along, we're like, oh, we can't put anything in the cloud. We kind of just got used to, yeah, okay, we can probably just put stuff in the cloud. It's going to be fine. I think we're going to get that way with AI. I just think it's going to take a while. So I think, and it sucks because right at the moment, if you're a pen tester, you probably can't use AI like to a large degree. If you're a bug bounty hunter, yeah, you can use it. Of course you can. So we're at the stage where the bug bounty hunters are having all the fun with AI, and like pen testers are kind of just like at the sideline, just like looking kind of dreamily over at them, playing with their AI tools and getting to use AI, and we're just like, wish I could.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I agree with you. The analogy with cloud is a good one. And eventually they'll find a way to make it work, mostly because these AI tools are powerful. Like they have been finding valid bugs in products. Many CVEs today have been found by AI tools. So I can definitely see them being useful in pen tests. Now, one side of it is in the pen test itself, and the other side is in report writing. And so I guess one thing about using AI for writing is I'm in favor of using it for technical work. Sometimes to write a summary, it's pretty good. But I find written documents generated by AI to be almost repulsive, and you can kind of see that in a lot of bug bounty reports. Some of them are clearly generated by AI, and I think the reason is because it's like mass generation of like a large number of findings spread everywhere with no real thought behind them, that it just looks and reads like mass generated, on not detailed, not customized, not even made for human consumption in a way. So it ends up just reading in an ugly way, and kind of just pisses you off. So what are your thoughts on using AI to like write reports or, bug bounty findings?
Yeah, I think we can. Well, firstly, I think AI is going to get better. So
Okay.
I think it will probably get better at writing. But I also think like we have already the templates that we use for reports. I see no reason why we couldn't just get AI to sort of take those templates and be like, hey, can you just like rigidly use these templates,
Nice.
but add the specific customer data, right, to the evidence or something?
Because you already have a solid template in place that it could
Right.
help with. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it might just be a case of you have like, okay, well, if you're a company that does reproduction, like detailed reproduction steps for the evidence, and there are some that do more detail than others, you can be like, okay, well, this is the kind of evidence we need. Like we need reproduction steps of this style. That's the thing I think AI is good at. If you can give it options for how you want stuff to be presented, it most of the time, because obviously hallucinations and AI is non-deterministic, most of the time it will at least try and do what you've asked. So I think that's probably where the solution is going to be, is on giving AI the options of here's the way a human would write it. Please like use sentences exactly like this. Because yeah, a lot of pen test reports, if you compare two reports from the same company for different customers, they look very similar because they're using templates, and recommendations shouldn't generally change. There'll be slight tweaks here and there, but yeah, I think that's probably where report writing is going to go. Yeah, I think if you do report narratives as well, if you're a kind of company that does report narratives, which the company I work for right now does,
Wait, sorry.
That
What
could
is
be
it? What is a
interesting.
report narrative?
So a report narrative, I used to not like them, and now they're kind of growing on me. I think some companies overdo it. A report narrative is generally it's separate to the findings, but it's a description. It's a long prose, sort
Mm.
of multiple paragraphs, sometimes multiple pages on how you actually tested, like
Oh,
what you
okay.
actually tested for. There are some companies that completely overdo it. Like I've heard 20 plus pages, which just seems insane to me. The company I work for right now is less strict about that, and I like it. It's good because, especially if you have a pen test report that doesn't have a lot of findings, it shows the customer you actually did do testing, though. Like, you can explain exactly what you. I tried these kind of attacks, or I found that the application used a JWT. I tried various attacks against JWT. Here's screenshots or code snippets of those attacks failing. So it's more of like reassurance. Personally, I don't think many customers read them, if I'm quite honest with you. If I was at a company that insisted I write 20 plus pages of like documenting absolutely every single thing I did during a pen test, I think I would resign. But because I just don't believe any customer is actually spending the time to read them. However, if it's more about documenting that you actually understood the application and showing that you tried some things, you don't have to show absolutely everything you tried, but you tried different attacks. Here are some failing, just as proof and reassurance to the customer, hey, we actually did this. I think that's where it's valuable. And I know I think there's a tool maybe in Burp that sort of monitors you as you test, and then it sort of will write a kind of narrative for you based on, oh, I saw you using the repeater tab to try different SQL injections. And so you can kind of go from that. The AI sort of realizes, well, he tried 10 different SQL injection attempts on this parameter. I can put that into sort of a narrative like, hey, these are the attempts, these ones failed. So that could be a useful, like a use for AI, I guess. But I think, yeah, it's going to be difficult, but just again, because of the data security thing, because to write a report, you're going to have to know how you tested, which invariably gives access to the data. It's a lovely mess, but that is pretty much AI right now, right? So, yeah.
Nice. And you just reminded me, so in Burp you have like plugins or add-ons you can use just extra ways you can use the tool. So are there any that you think are like must have, that are like life-changing, like super like necessary to have, or is it kind of like up to the pen tester?
I think so. Yeah, Burp extensions. There are definitely some that are must-haves, just because there are things in Burp that it can't really do that well natively. Authorization testing is a big one, and so you'll have tools like I mean, there's currently debate on it's Authorize versus Auth Analyzer. I think are the top two. Authorize, I think they've actually updated recently, so Authorize might be good again. Authorize wasn't updated for years. Auth Analyzer is the one I use right now, and as you were talking about earlier when you mentioned like, oh, you log in as an admin, change organization settings, replay that request with a lower user's cookie. Auth Analyzer does that all automatically. So you basically just give it the cookie of the low privileged user, and you just browse the application as an admin, and it will just switch out the cookies for every single request. And then you get a nice thing where you can compare the two requests and see, oh, this one was a 200 okay, this one was a 401 or something. And so you can generally speaking, it's like kind of like semi-automatic, right? So it's a semi-automated way of testing for authorization issues. That's a good one. There are tons by James Kettle at Paulsvicker. Param Miner is a really good one. The HTTP request smuggler is a really good one. Turbo Intrude is a really good one. There are just, honestly, I should probably publish a list at some point. But I think I have like maybe 10 to 15 that I always have loaded. There are some
Nice.
that I just load generally. And I have coded my own as well. Like, I would include my own copier and collector
Nice.
in that list just because I like them and I think they're really useful. But yeah, the nice thing about extensions these days as well is that they're just very easy to vibe code. Honestly,
Nice.
there's a claude.md file that Portswigger give you that allows you to sort of vibe code them a bit better. So writing extensions in Burp has never been easier, which is really good.
Nice. That's awesome. I mean, I think that's a great side project. If someone wants to get into pen testing for the first time and they want to prove on their resume that they're up for it, like if you can, yeah, like just make your own extension would be really good on the resume. Okay, so at that point, you have a report written, you finish your pen test, it's the last day. and you're gonna do the readout with the customer to go over the findings and the pen test.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I guess what are some of your thoughts on readouts and how they usually go?
I mean, I like readouts. They don't usually happen on the last day. I will say that.
Usually it's
Sometimes they
after.
don't happen at all.
Mm.
The last day of a pen test, you'll write your report, then it gets QA'd. Some companies have like a week-long QA, some have a 2-week. And then your report goes to the customer, they read it, they process it. Generally, a readout will only happen if someone who gets the report, right? That might be the developer, that might be the CISO, that might be a project manager. If they have any questions
Yeah.
or objections to
Mm-hmm.
findings in the report, some companies will just do it as an exercise. So they
Mm.
like to see a readout of all the issues. And yeah, generally speaking, it's literally just we organize a call with the customer. We get on the call. I'll share my screen, which will have the report. I will usually ask them if there are any specific questions or specific issues they have, because I don't want to just start reading through the report and then have them be like, actually, you could have just skipped the first 3 issues. We had no questions about that.
Mm.
So yeah, but if they have questions, obviously, generally speaking, yeah, if they have a specific question, we'll just dive into that. I'll try and answer it. If they just want me to read through the report, I will. I'll usually say something like, if you want to have it, so I usually say, if you have any questions at any point, just feel free to interrupt me. When I first started doing readouts, it was incredibly awkward. I would be like, after every issue, I'd be like, do you have any questions about this?
And then silence for
And
10
then
seconds.
silence. Okay. Yeah. So now I literally just open up by like, please feel free to interrupt me. If I don't hear anything, I'm just going to keep reading because it's just going to be easier for everyone. So that's how I generally do them. And then, yeah, most of the time, the questions are going to be either about specific mitigations or asking more about the context of the vulnerability. Occasionally, what you'll get is somebody debating a vulnerability or debating whether it's like a high or a critical or something.
I was gonna ask about that. That's the main reason. So I was getting at that. Like sometimes you'll go through findings and they'll be like, what? Why is this a high? This should be a low. And now you're kind of they decided to go into like fully defensive mode, right? And now
Yeah.
you're in this debate. And so how do you handle those?
Yeah. So usually, I mean, I try and build a nice rapport with my customers. So
Yeah.
hopefully then when we have those kind of issues, it's easy to diffuse them and I can explain my reasoning for why I think it's high and stuff like that. And they might have a good argument. There have been occasions where they will argue something and I'll be like, you know what, that actually makes more sense. Or maybe I didn't have the context, right? After all, I had 5 days of this thing. Sometimes they'll be right and we adjust the finding. It might not be down to a low, but we're like, okay, well, we can put this down to a medium. We don't feel confident putting it at a low, but a medium feels better. Occasionally, there have been customers where like I had a medium and they're like, can you bump this up to a high? And it's mostly because they want the high in the report so they can light a fire under somebody's ass and get it fixed. And I'd be like,
that feels great.
if you want me to push a finding up to a high, that's absolutely fine. Happy to do that. So yeah, but I would say like 99.9% of readout calls go just swimmingly. They're just, everybody's nice. Sometimes a lot of jokes happen. I remember one of the best readout calls, I'd found a lot of like high and critical findings on this web app. We get in the call, and before I can say anything, the customer comes out and says, well, you had fun, didn't you? Which is like, it's great because, everyone knows, this is a bad report for them, but at least, we can sort of break the ice and be like, okay, yeah, I found a lot, but let's get it fixed. And I think that's really comes back to something I said at the beginning, which is like, we are on the same team. Like, I didn't break your app because, I wanted you guys to fail. Like, I broke your app because there was stuff wrong with it. I told you how to fix it as well. So, let's do this, and then we can retest the issues when you fix them, and hopefully, I want to deliver a report that has basically no vulnerabilities in it. Like, that would be great. It doesn't happen that often, but ideally, that's what my job would look like.
Yeah, good one. So one more thing I'm personally curious about is that, so I did pen testing for I think 3 years, and then I kept feeling like you're writing a report, you're delivering the PDF, you're working at the PDF factory, you deliver PDFs, you come back, the next year or whatever, and you test the company again, and like, nothing's been fixed, or like many things have not been fixed. No one really cares, and it's like, what am I doing? It's like I'm doing the same thing over and over again. And you're one of the few people that has stuck to pen testing for like I think like like of all the pen testers I know, like most of them left after a few years. You're one of the very few that are like just like lifelong pen testers.
No,
How do you
you've cursed
how do you
me.
stay? No, I mean like it's interesting. Like how do you find passion in continuing to do that? Like what are some things that draw you to coming back to pen tests again and again?
I think I've been incredibly lucky in that I've worked for a bunch of companies, and especially when I've got to the position. So a lot of pen testers, unlike me, they will do a lot of stuff. They'll do web apps, but they'll do mobile apps. They'll do internals. They'll do externals. And I kind of feel like when I used to do internals and externals, those felt so samey.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're finding some different stuff, but with an internal, it's always Active Directory,
Yeah.
right? Like it's just always Active Directory, and there's a finite number of things you can do with Active Directory. So I feel like you're doing this. You just like it's like almost like watching paint dry internals, which is why I hated them. Web apps are just a bit different for me because ultimately we are testing bespoke web applications, right? That is web applications that have been coded by the customer, usually like 99% of the time. And so they're all different. They're all a completely new challenge. When you sit down on day one, you realistically don't know what you're going to find. Even though it's using HTTP, it's the code is all different, right? The back-end code, the front-end code is all different. The environment's different. So every single web app is almost a completely different thing that you've never seen before. That, I think, still keeps me engaged. And yeah, sometimes I'll test web applications every year and I'll find the same stuff. But like, if I was testing the same application maybe every quarter, maybe it starts to get boring. But I think most people just do them every year. So that isn't as bad. And I've managed to sort of somehow carve out this little niche for me where all I'm doing is web apps and APIs, and I seem to just keep hitting different customers every year, and it's fine. Yeah. On top of that, like I think making content as well has been nice. Like it's not like I'm just doing like my life in cybersecurity is not just pen testing. Like yes, I'm apparently perpetually a pen tester. This is just me, permanent pen tester now. Thank you so much for cursing me. But my cybersecurity life is not just that. Like I love the community. The community keeps me sort of alive and focused. I love teaching this stuff. I like creating content. I love just going to DEF CON and running stupid contests. So there's like my day job and what I do in cybersecurity are almost completely different things. So I think that probably helps.
Yeah, I actually was about to say that, like, you're I guess you being a content creator and educator in general kind of like fuels your dedication to web app pen testing.
Yeah. That's another thing. Like if I stopped being a web app pen tester, and I wasn't involved in AppSec or wasn't involved that much, I would feel bad creating content about web app
Right,
pen testing because
definitely.
it's like, yeah, I know, and this is like, I don't mean to disrespect anyone who does content creation full time because several people I know do, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to say that they shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, I would feel uncomfortable continue to create content in a field that I basically no longer am part of.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's such, especially web app stuff, it's such a changing field. Like
Yeah.
every single year, we get new types of vulnerabilities coming out, and it's a constant learning process. So I think I would get behind quite quickly.
Yeah, and it just keeps fueling like new ideas and new things to talk about. Yeah. So if someone, I mean, often I'm talking to people who's telling me like, "Hey, I want to get into cybersecurity," and then I ask like, "Okay, so what do you feel like doing?" And often they say like, "Oh, I want to get into pen testing." So for the folks who say that, what's some of the advice you have for them on how to get into pen testing?
Yeah, I don't have any good advice.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. Like I got into pen testing 15 years ago, And my first job in cybersecurity was writing audit checks for an auditing product. I did that for 6 months. And then after 6 months, there was like a trial period and they kept me on, but like a monthly rolling contract. They
Oof.
weren't like, they didn't have the money to keep me on. They wanted to keep me there, but month to month. And, me being young Tiberius, possibly naive, was like, well, I've been in cybersecurity for 6 months. I might as well be a pen tester now. And so I just started applying to pen test places and got interviews and failed a bunch of interviews and then succeeded at a company and got the job there. Met Andy, my co-host, obviously the better co-host, your favorite co-host of the podcast. Like, I literally, the first day of being a pen tester, I met Andy. That's how long we've known each other now. But yeah, but back then you could do that. You could. I always say, I've said it for years, I kind of just tripped and fell into pen testing. Like, you can't. At the time, I didn't really have any networking experience. Like, I had web dev experience, but only my own sort of freelance stuff as a teenager. I was technical. I was technically minded, but I've never worked in a SOC, right? I've never done any kind of support roles. And in some ways that hurt me a little bit early on because I was kind of just thrown in the deep end. And I don't think any company, I mean, I will say I do know people who have just gone straight into pen testing these days. So it does still happen. Incredibly rare though. So that's a thing. And that's why I don't like giving advice myself, because I don't feel like my experience is probably completely irrelevant. What I will say though, I do have another podcast, which is my own little podcast, which is called Getting Into Cybersecurity, which is a solution that I came up with to everybody asking me, hey, how do I get into cybersecurity? And me saying, don't ask me this question. My solution was, hey, I'm just going to interview people who've recently got into pen testing or who've been in pen testing but can still talk about, like, how they got into it and maybe impart some advice. I forget how many episodes. There's a Spotify. It's on my YouTube as well, but you can go and watch some of that. There are definitely some pen testers in there.
I actually
And
forgot about.
yeah.
I think it's been a while since you've put up an episode there, right? Like,
Yeah, I have to edit one with my friend White Cyberduck, but yeah, I've been putting it off. I did recently move, so I've been putting up a lot of content creation other than the podcast, like the main one. But yeah, I'll get back into that for sure.
nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I agree. There's no good advice for getting into pen testing, mostly because it varies with each person's experience. I mean, I had some experience making like web apps, and that definitely helped me. I mean, I think my first job was a pen testing job. They had like a challenge where you had to like basically write a simple report, and then they had a small series of challenges, and I was able to pass them. But there's no single silver bullet for that. And I definitely remember like the first like, maybe like year or so being like just like overwhelmed on the job of like
Yeah,
learning so much, like every day learning an incredible amount. So it is good for learning, but it's yeah, I think as you said, like it does feel like getting thrown into the deep end and having to figure it out. Certainly possible, yeah, but you just have to be, I guess, working on side projects, working on like Hack the Box, Try Hack Me. Building your own web apps, I think, does help a lot because if you're testing
hmm
web apps, might as well know how to make your own. So,
yeah, exactly. And I think honestly, like it's probably still true that if you are going to become a junior pen tester, you're not just going to be doing web apps. You're probably going to be doing a
mm,
mix of stuff. So
hmm,
yeah, the knowledge required is probably a bit greater.
that's true. Yeah.
But if you do want to focus on web apps, definitely having that core knowledge, foundational knowledge about how the web works. It is still to this day, even though we've gone from, HTTP 1 to HTTP 3, like it's still relatively simple. If you get down to like the bare bones of how web apps and how browsers work, there's definitely a level of complexity there, but you can sort of break it down and simplify it a lot.
Hmm.
So it is still basically a request response. And yeah, it's not too difficult, I would say.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to talk about before we end is I want to talk about tools for a bit.
Mhm.
And so I'll share my screen, but I made this little tier list that we're going to fill up for tools that you
No,
would use while running a web app pen test.
boy, this will be fun. This might be controversial.
Yes, this is This is going to be spicy. So
Oh,
this
well,
is
I
going
mean,
to be
I know
spicy.
S tier hacking the art of exploitation immediately.
Okay, so for context, we're trying to figure out as a web app pen tester, what are the tools that you will be using,
Okay.
and we'll rank them.
Do you want me to be completely honest, or are we memeing?
I guess both start with your meme answer and then with a diplomatic answer, and then we'll go somewhere in between.
I mean, hacking the art of exploitation is S tier, except
Well,
it's D tier, right?
let's
We're going through. We're going through like this. All right,
let's
we'll do it
go
in
through
order.
in order. Okay, so the first one is Burp Suite, but the community edition. Community edition first.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
you wouldn't use it
yet.
on a web app pen test.
I haven't ranked it yet. Wait,
D is you put it D.
You think community edition Burp is actually D tier?
If we're talking about using it on an actual pen test, you would never do it.
Really?
That's the thing. Because if you're a pen tester, you should arguably have access to Burp Suite Pro.
Mm-hmm.
And Burp Suite Community is it's limited in so many ways that it makes no sense to use it. So it's definitely a good tool if you want to get used to Burp and don't want to pay for Burp or can't pay for Burp. But there's no way you would ever use it on an actual pen test.
Yeah,
that's my advice.
I think if you're like, let's say, a student and you just want to learn how to use it, I would rank it like S or A at least. Like,
Well,
I think
here's the thing: are we just ranking these tools in terms of like usefulness or in terms of would I use it on a pen test?
I guess it could be either. Okay. I guess the ultimate ranking should be like, would I actually use it on a professional pen test?
And in that case, it's D tier.
Yeah.
Like,
and the reason it's
is.
D is because you have Burp Suite.
It's because you have Burp Suite Pro, which is S tier.
I agree.
I would argue almost these days, almost any if you were just to reduce any web app pen tester to limit it to one tool, Burp Suite Pro is the one they would choose. There's just no comparison.
Yeah.
So you can do all and with Bambdas, which is a new feature, or relatively new feature in Burp, and extensions, like you can extend it so much and write your own sort of code for it that it can pretty much do everything any other tool could do anyway.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. Like, when I was pen testing, it was like 99% of your time is just in Burp Suite. So unanimously S tier tool. So this one is relatively newer. It's been around for like maybe 6-ish years. It's like a command line Go tool, FFUF to basically fuzz, and you give it a word list. You can point it to directories or any attribute in the URL. So what do you think of this one?
So FFUF I don't actually use. If we can use it as a placeholder for any sort of directory busting tool, then I would put it S tier. So because I do use Ferox Buster.
Yeah.
But however, if we're just talking about using FFUF for fuzzing, Burp Suite Pro has Intruder, and Intruder is better.
Ooh, that's a good point.
But I'm happy to put it S tier because Burp Suite does not really have a good directory busting tool. It does have one. It's just not that good. And FFUF arguably has a better directory busting tool. Even though I don't use it, I use Ferox Buster. So I'd be happy putting it as S tier as long as just using it for directory busting, on the understanding that I also use Ferox Buster instead.
Yeah, that's fine. I am kind of using it as a placeholder for like Durbuster or anything like that.
I think S tier.
So, okay.
Yeah,
and
that's only because like Burp Suite Pro, its directory busting capabilities, while they're okay, maybe they're even better than okay, they're good. Ferox Buster and FFUF are just better at that specific task.
Cool. Agreed. Next one, Zap, which you should not call OWASP Zap, since it is no longer an OWASP tool. It is now just called Zap. I think by checkmarks. I think they acquired it. So what do you think of that?
I'm going to put it as B tier.
Why?
And the reason is I wouldn't use it on a pen test because I have Burp Suite Pro. However, you can do a pen test with Zap. So if you don't have access to Burp Suite Pro, which we've already said is pretty much like you're always going to have access to Burp Suite Pro if you're doing web app pen testing. If you don't, Zap is a solid tool that pretty much does everything that Burp does for free. The interface marks it down a little bit. It's not as good as Burp. It doesn't have a lot of the pro features that you would expect from Burp, and that's not because it's a bad tool. That's because it's being coded by, I believe, 4 developers. And Burp has, I don't know how many developers it has, a lot. And also it's a paid tool, so you're getting paid developers, a lot of money behind Burp Suite Pro. So yeah.
So here, as an HTTP intercepting proxy, I would put it as D tier. I would put it behind Community Edition Burp, and the reason is
really that's going to be the most controversial thing.
I think the UI is atrocious. I think it's one of the ugliest tools ever made with an unintuitive UI. Remember the HUD? It used to it popped up with a HUD with a pilot.
Yeah.
Like, what am I looking at? And I remember one of the maintainers asked for feedback on like how could they improve it, and I thought like I don't even know where to begin. It is just ugly. Like just hire a designer maybe, right? But I might put it B, or actually for me it leans towards A, B plus or A, and the reason is I like its GitHub action. So you can run it as a GitHub action to automate running scans, either on your own repos or anything really. And because of that, I think that's a solid way to automate. I think in Burp, to run automated DAST scans, you need to buy an enterprise license.
Yeah, they have a DAST product, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like not even like Burp Pro, it's like a separate like enterprise license, I think. So whereas here with Zap, you can just it's just a GitHub action you can use for free. You point it to a web app, and it can run scans that way, completely automated. I really like that. So from that perspective, A. From purely
pen testing, I would say B. If we're going, and my reasoning is if you can't use Burp Suite Pro for whatever reason, you don't have a license, or you're in a bind and you've just been stuck with Zap, you can use Zap to do a pen test. You can. So I think that's why I would and arguably you could with Burp Suite Community, but Burp Suite Community has so many restrictions on it, like with extensions, especially with the rate limiting intruder without the ability to scan stuff, that I think that's why it deserves D tier, and Zap is a solid B.
Okay. So next one is Nuclei by Project Discovery. It's also a command line tool. You can automate it. You can also run it as GitHub Actions. And what I like is it has like templates that you can use. You can download templates. What are your thoughts on it?
So I find it being used more for bug bounty than anything related to pen testing. And I think that's largely because a lot of those scripts are for finding specific CVEs.
Yeah, exactly.
And sort of endpoints, which you can do in pen testing, but a lot of web app pen testing is bespoke stuff, so you're not going to have CVEs. So it's not something I personally use on a pen test. So we could argue it's D tier for that reason, but I know a lot of bug bounty hunters love it. I wouldn't say it's S tier because I think you can do plenty of web app pen tests without it. I'd be happy putting it at C tier.
Really?
Just because I know it's a decent tool, but I think again, there's a lot of stuff you can do in Burp.
Yeah.
Burp Pro.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I agree that you don't actually need it on an actual pen test. Bug bounty, S tier. I think like in general, it also helps with automation. You can automate running it also through a GitHub action. From that perspective, S tier. But actual pen test, you don't really need it. It could be nice running like you have like your own set of like templates that you consistently run on every pen test. Just at the beginning, day one, that could be a useful thing to do. In that case, maybe that's A tier. Maybe I would put it like B, just as
I'd be happy putting it B.
It's useful.
We can compromise on B.
You might not. You don't really. You can do many great pen tests without ever touching it. I think that's completely fine. But if you want to use it, it can be useful. I think it's a solid B.
Yeah. The other thing is, again, Burp Suite Pro has the functionality with B checks.
Yeah.
And we have now Bambda B checks. There's a huge number of sort of externally third-party written B checks now written by the communities. I think it's This is the problem. Tib3rius is just, it's so good that it almost like needs a tier higher than S tier, and then everyone else can go on S tier if it's decent.
I should have tried to get Portswigger to sponsor this. This is unfortunately not sponsored, but we do really like Burp Suite is just that good. It is it's really all you need, and it encompasses, like, it's so feature rich that it kind of has everything else in one tool. Now, speaking of Burp Suite, there has been recently a new competitor, Kaido.
Yes.
Kaido, and so this is they've been trying to catch up to Burp. What do you think of it?
So I think the issue is, and if we're ranking them fairly, they have to go technically below Zap. Because they don't have as many features as Zap does. Again, it's a very popular with bug bounty hunters. And I think the reason it's popular, well, firstly, it's cheaper than Burp, but also it's not as feature rich as Burp. And a lot of bug bounty hunters aren't doing full pen tests. They're just searching for specific issues. So they have a methodology for that. You might just be searching for cross-site scripting. You might just be searching for IDORs. Kaido is very useful if you're doing that, because you can easily just, put your workflow into it. But there's certain things it can't do unless you use some of the extensions. I know it's got an extension thing now, which is great. However, I still think in terms of would you use it on a pen test, I don't really know anybody who uses it on a pen test. So it's kind of like lower than, I would put it C, and not to say it's a bad tool. I just don't think it's quite there yet. I don't think you can run a full web app pen test on it properly. And you would probably still use Zap for that if you could. So that's the only reason I would put it C tier.
I agree. I am rooting for them. I hope they add features and become like a real competitor to Burp. But I think for now, it's just not there yet. And good luck to them. I hope eventually they implement way more features. So next one, a bit of a weird one, but Shodan, which
never goes on sale, and it's really unfortunate that there's never a $5 sale. You're gonna have to link to the meme for people. They have to flash that up on screen in the edit. And it never goes on sale. Really unfortunate. Yeah, Shodan. I mean, D. You just don't use it, because the whole point of Shodan is it's passive, right? They're passive. They're actively scanning the internet, and you are using it as a search engine to passively sort of see what's out there. If you're doing a pen test, you have permission to just actively scan stuff. So there's no reason for doing any of that. So it's a great tool. And again, this is not a ranking of how good the tool is. We're talking very specifically in terms of web app pen testing, and it's just completely useless for that.
Completely agreed. Yeah, like if you're doing bug bounty or red team or just OWASP in general,
really
it can be but for
really
web
good tool.
test,
I have a subscription to it. It's a very good tool.
Me too. Yeah, me too. I use their API key for many things, but yeah, for if I have an intern doing web pen tests and I look at them and they have Shodan, I'll be like, what are you doing? Next one is Nmap.
I mean, I'm gonna put it at C tier, and the only reason it's at C tier is I do technically use one of their SSL enumeration scripts as a very quick way of enumerating some of the SSL ciphers in use. But other than that, there's no point. It doesn't really have. I mean, it does have web app specific scripts, but I don't see any use case for them.
Some of the scripts can be nice to have in a similar way that Nuclei is nice. I think from that perspective, it can be close to Nuclei, but
the scripts are just not as good as Nuclei. So
less good. Yeah.
So I'm happy with C. You would definitely sometimes use it on a pen test, on a web app pen test. Especially if you're using some of those scripts, just to quickly enumerate the SSL versions is good. But yeah, other than that, it's an internal network and external network tool. I mean, it's called network map.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think C.
Makes sense. Next one, people call it SQL map, but Tiberius calls it SQL map.
SQL map. Yeah,
So tell us why you think it's S tier.
it's S tier. So if you have found an SQL injection either manually or you've run Burp Scanner and it's flagged something, or one of the extensions in Burp Scanner flagged something, you can obviously try to manually exploit it. But 99 times out of 100, it's just easier to pass that request to SQL map, and SQL map will just do it for you. And one of the neat things about SQL map is it has a memory. So once you've scanned a request and SQL map has found and confirmed the vulnerability, it'll finish scanning and tell you, hey, there's an SQL injection in this parameter. You can then just run the same command again and append one of the options to extract certain data. And it won't have to scan the entire request again to find the vulnerability. It's saved it in its memory, and it will know, oh, I've seen this request before. I know how to exploit this, and it will just go off and do it. It's incredibly. I honestly, if you've read the source code, it's all written in Python. The source code is insane. It's an incredibly detailed project, and the way you can adjust it and write your own little scripts for tampering with some of the vulnerability, some of the payloads, is incredible. Like, it's one of the best open source offensive security tools ever, in my opinion.
So
it does one job, and it does it so incredibly well that it deserves S tier, even though you only ever use it for SQL injection. I mean, it is SQL.
So I was half joking about S tier. Okay, so here's
It's
what I'll
S tier.
say. So it's very useful. At the same time, sometimes I want to put it in D tier, and the reason
Wow.
the reason is, so my first couple of years of pen testing, they were basically like, you're all banned from using SQL map because you're supposed to figure out how to do it by yourself, but also because some clients complained that it like took down their DB from just like being like trying too many things and like getting into some weird state, sending some weird queries where like it caused issues. And so we were like, basically, like, don't use it. Now, if you do find a like input field where you're confident it should be vulnerable to SQL injection, and you're trying to get a payload to work, then yeah, definitely S tier. But I've also seen too many like beginners that just like throw it at every single input field ever, like
Yeah,
without ever
absolutely.
thinking, and like anything they see, any input field, they're just like hammering it with SQL map for like hours, and it's like, what are you doing? And so
Yeah.
for that reason, I kind of want people to like pay more attention and not use it everywhere. And so it can be S tier, but I'm gonna downgrade it to A, to be
No,
like,
highly disagree with this.
highly disagree.
Like, this is the thing, we're pen testers. Okay, we
Okay.
ideally should be using tools correctly.
Okay.
So
Okay. We're assuming.
I just think it's, and I agree with your point. Like, it can it be used dangerously? Absolutely, but you could also use Burp Suite in the same way. Like, you could run an intruder attack with a ridiculous. Like, there are like dangerous SQL payloads in the intruder default SQL injection lists.
That's fair.
Like,
Yeah.
you shouldn't really run them. SQL map at least doesn't do anything too dangerous unless you set it to risk 3, and by default it's on risk 1. So, and maybe in the past it was a bit more dangerous. I know now, like, if you run it, like, even level 3, risk 1, it's generally pretty quick. It doesn't try anything more. But like, the amount of time it saves, just, manually versus manually exploiting an SQL injection, I think it deserves S tier. There's no better tool I can think of for doing SQL injection exploitation. Which is a super useful part of pen testing, is showing impact. And if you're stuck for hours just manually exploiting an SQL injection when SQL map could have done it in a minute, I think that deserves S tier.
Okay.
I get your argument, but I refuse to put it on A tier.
I'm convinced it's S tier. As S tier. Next one, OpenVAS, an open source vulnerability scanner. Do you think this is S tier?
Absolutely, without credit though. And I mean, it's D. OpenVAS has an interesting history. So it was Nessus used to be, I see Nessus in the list, but Nessus used to be open source, and then they closed it and then I believe OpenVAS was basically forked from the last open source version of Nessus. I mean, yeah, it's a vulnerability scanner for networks, pretty much. So yeah, it's you wouldn't use it on a web app pen test.
You would never use it.
It's just
You would never use it.
it's just silly.
You would
So
never use
it's
it.
D
Yeah.
tier. To be honest, I think actually I would have said it's arguable if you need to pay for Nessus with OpenVAS, but like it used to be, sorry, I rephrase that. It used to be that there's no point in using it because Nessus was just so much better. With Nessus price, I don't know if you've looked at Nessus pricing these days. It's
Not in a
gone
while.
insane. Yeah. So it might actually be a useful tool. I don't know. Because Nessus is just so expensive now. But yeah, it's D tier for web apps anyway.
Well, I guess natural follow-up will do Nessus next. So what do you think of Nessus?
Yeah, I mean, there's no point in using it. Does, so I will say it does have a web app scanning mode.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever had it find anything that wasn't easily findable via just Burp Suite, manual testing, etc. So for that reason, it's D tier. If you want to know,
above OpenVAS though.
yeah, it's better than OpenVAS.
Probably better than Shodan as well.
I mean, if we're rating stuff inside these, this is gonna get crazy because there's already some reorganizing. Yeah, I mean it's definitely a good vulnerability scanning tool.
Yeah.
I feel like it's not that useful for pen tests, even internal pen tests these days. But if you are a sysadmin and you want to find unpatched stuff and potentially vulnerable stuff on your network, just get a Nessus license. And scan the network every month or so, and you'll get tons of stuff to do.
Yeah,
it's a very
even
good
then
tool.
I think eventually it'll be obsolete. I can't imagine like Tenable, charging too much for it, too many competitors coming up at this point. I don't know, I think it might not last a long time. Curl, do you think so? It's the logo is a bit cut, but this is Curl, the command line tool. So do you think this is D tier? Do you think C tier? B? What do you think of Curl?
So Curl's an interesting one because obviously it's not really a pen testing tool at all. So you could arguably say it's D tier. Having said that, it is like Burp Suite, and I'm pretty sure Zap and probably even Kaido have the ability to just right click on any request and be like, copy this as a curl command.
Yeah.
Which can potentially be useful. So I just kind of want to put it in C tier just because it is it's still potentially a good thing to have on a pen test, even though you're not really using it for anything to do with pen testing. It may just be to replay a command exactly as you have it in Burp, but through a command line tool. That's something. But in terms of, could you do a pen test without curl?
Yes, no, absolutely you can. Now, from my perspective, it's S or A. And the reason is for the reproduction steps, usually you want to make them easy to follow by someone who doesn't necessarily have Burp or other tools. And so you want to make a lot of your like exploits or reproduction steps, you want to have a way for someone to follow them using curl. And so you turn a lot of steps into like curl commands.
I've never done that.
Really?
I don't think I've ever worked at a company that does. Yeah.
Okay.
We always just have the HTTP requests to show like what request was sent.
But sometimes don't decline something. Ask like, well, how can I try to submit that request again? And you're like, oh, well, here's like a curl one-liner, and then you can like just use
I've never had that.
Oh, really? Oh,
so maybe I just got lucky. To be fair, I do usually have pretty detailed reproduction steps that tell like which part of the application to go to and what to do. I can see it. I'd be happy to put it at A. Like it is a good tool, and I can see the argument like for putting stuff in reports.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that you can do many pen tests without ever using it at all. And that's completely valid. In that sense, it could be D tier. But I think just as a general like command line tool to send like HTTP requests, I think like
we have to have something in the A tier. Otherwise it's going to be completely empty, isn't it?
I'm convinced. So next one, Postman, and that's to play with API calls.
Here's the thing: Postman itself absolutely nowadays in 2026 D tier.
Really?
And the reason is pretty simple. Postman up until version 9 point something was an awesome tool. Great. The best API testing tool on the planet. And then they decided for some stupid reason that everyone had to create an account and that all
Right.
your workspaces were going to be synced to the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that no company I've worked for since has allowed us to use Postman, because even if a customer provides us with a Postman collection, which means that they are pretty obviously syncing it with the cloud, we're not allowed to for data protection reasons. There are, so I will say at work we do use Postman, but it's the old version. So we do technically still use it, but if we're talking about the modern version, it's crap. There are better ones like Bruno. Bruno is actually a fork of Postman version 9, the last version before it went. It's actually pretty good.
Oh, nice.
It has all the features. The only difference is the script. For some reason, they changed the way scripts work. So it's a slight learning curve with scripts. So I love Bruno. I think Bruno's awesome. And they're very adamant they're not going to go the same way as Postman. Everything's always going to be offline. So it depends on whether we're classing Postman today, because if it's Postman, the current version, it's absolute D tier. If it's Postman in general, version 9, and maybe just an API collection like Bruno, I would say it's A or S tier. Just because it's such a nice tool to visualize API requests and track them, and you can proxy it through Burp Suite, which is always nice. So as long as we're having the caveat that it's not the current version of Postman, which requires you to sync stuff with their cloud for no good reason, then I would say it's either A or S tier.
Yeah.
And you could argue S, and I'd be happy. I would be happy in either A or S.
Yeah. Yeah. So I kind of want to have it in both. I wish we could split it up into
right?
old version is A, current version is D.
Pretty much.
Well, let's keep it A for now.
Yeah.
UP scan to scan WordPress sites. S tier?
So here's the thing. It's like most web application pen tests just don't use WordPress.
Yeah.
Right? So you could argue it's kind of like the Postman thing, right? You could argue like in some circumstances it's D tier. But
and some
if you are testing,
S, but
yeah. If you are scanning anything to do with WordPress and you don't use WP scan, it's like, are you a pen tester? Like, what are you doing? So like in that very specific, and it might even be in S tier because SQL map's in S tier, right? If you don't find SQL injection, there's no reason to run SQL map, right? If you don't find WordPress, there's no reason to run WordPress. But if you find SQL injection, you should run SQL map. And if you find WordPress, you should run WP scan. So for that reason, I think I've just talked myself into putting it in S tier.
No, I don't know. I can't put WP scan in S tier in good conscience. It feels wrong.
I know, right?
I want to put it in D tier. Like my heart tells me put it in D tier. But that's not fair either because there are use cases for it.
Yeah.
So maybe like B. C, I don't know.
B or C, I guess.
It can't be better than Nmap. Like
it can't. No.
So it has to be behind Nmap. So C tier at the end of C tier. So new tool Claude, and I mean that could Claude Code or just like in general using Claude for whatever purposes. It could also be Gemini if you want. It doesn't actually matter too much.
I think it has to at least go A, just because Claude Code, and we can use Claude as a placeholder for like Codex as well.
Sure. Yeah.
I just think for specifically very quickly coding Burp extensions to help with a very specific like application problem. It's really nice. It also, I believe, Anthropic are one of the things that Burp AI uses. So for that reason, it kind of, if you like using Burp AI, you're kind of using Claude.
Okay.
So I think it has to go there.
Yeah, I mean,
nothing to do with, with data security and everything, but I think if
Yeah.
you need to code a Burp extension and you don't know how to use Java, you don't know how to write Burp extensions, Claude Code can get it done really quickly.
Yeah. So
which is
and for
nice.
that reason, like I can even see it being S tier, but it's just like
Yeah,
it's not
it could be.
really a pen testing tool, and so it's just like a general purpose tool that you can apply in pen tests, and for that reason, I'm just gonna keep it at the
I
you
think
know
A is fair.
yeah, A tier. Okay, and the book Hacking the Art of Exploitation, second edition by John Erickson. Tiberius, tell us why this is
I mean, do we lead
D
on the
or S?
meme and say it's S tier, or do we lead on the other meme and say it's D tier? I mean, it's literally nothing to do with web applications, so for that reason, it's D tier because it's literally about binary exploitation.
And that is probably my main criticism of the book. People are like, I want to get into pen testing. Most of my pen tests are going to be
Yeah.
web apps, and people are like, read this book, and this is S tier book, and it's like,
No,
well, it has
yeah,
nothing to do with web
nothing
apps.
to
I
do
mean,
with web apps.
maybe like some knowledge in it is tangential and could be helpful in some ways. I mean, there's no harm in knowing it, but if you're looking for a book to learn web app pen testing, do not read this one. Absolutely D tier, in my opinion.
Yeah.
OpenVAS
Yeah.
is probably more useful than this book.
It is. I bet OpenVAS has like scripts to do some version of web scanning, so it probably is literally more useful. Oh, this was fun. I like this as a way to end. Yeah, nice.
That's it. Oh my god, almost 2 hours. That is
Good luck editing this one.
no, yeah, that's not gonna be fun. Tiberius, where can people find you? Anything else you want to say at the end before we end?
I've had a lot of fun. This has been great. I mean, hopefully I answered some people's questions about what is web app pen testing. Yeah, I mean, I have a link tree, which like the problem is like I go by Tiberius, but some of the accounts are like 0x Tiberius because some bastard stole my name. So I'll give you a link to my link tree, which just has a long list of all the social accounts. But yeah, I'm on basically everything from X to Blue Sky to LinkedIn. Yeah, you can find me on whatever your favorite social network is.
Have you been posting on TikTok?
I have a few. I need to get back into posting on TikTok. I honestly, I'm on a pause for content right now because I was moving house. But
Oh yeah.
yeah, but I had some relatively popular TikTok videos. Like I got into a little niche of like, this is like a weirdly obscure but interesting web fact, like the history of why the referrer header in HTTP is misspelled, which is actually more interesting than you might think. But yeah, so those tend to do pretty well. Yeah, I'm on TikTok, a YouTube channel. I'm got 2 podcasts on Spotify. So I'm all over the place.
Cool. Tiberius, thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me.